Okay, in this video, I'm gonna show you how I switched my focus, and that was able to help me grow my business significantly in just a short period of time. So a lot of times what happens is owners, and we already talked about it a little bit in previous videos where we mentioned that like, hey, you hear information, you hear facts, and where do we put our focus? Now, a lot of us will default to negative, and that's okay. We ask ourselves, what is worst case scenario? And then we ask an empowering question to then go ahead and say like, well, okay, if that's worst case scenario, well then what does best case scenario look like? Now, one of the things that I started to realize more and more is that what was happening is when I started to look at worst case scenario, I would then pivot really quickly and try to change something. I would try to change a system, I would try to change an SOP, I would try to change an operation, and all that really did was move us further and further from our goal and made our staff really upset, because ultimately what I was doing is I was like, hey, we need to change this system, when realistically we just needed to kind of identify like why certain things weren't working. And that's where I wanted to make sure that I shot this video for you guys and talk about ways to mitigate risk. Now, just understand that anything divided by 0 or multiplied by 0 is still 0. So it's one of those things that like, we're really never going to be able to absolutely mitigate all of our risk. But what we really are trying to do, and a lot of stuff that we do with our program and working with owners, is we decrease the amount of risk, but it's still there. But we're trying to make sure we decrease the risk and people don't make the same mistakes that I made with my clinics. So one of the things to understand is that like when you were looking at mitigating risk and stuff like that, we want to leverage this thing called the theory of constraints. Now, the theory of constraint is something that happens in all the businesses, even not just businesses, but life around us. It's just like, what is the one thing right now that is constraining our progress? And how can we ruthlessly attack that one thing and remove it from the business, so then that way the business should just flow. And I thought that was really interesting. One of my mentors a long time ago, he said that, you know, hey, just be very careful when you're operating your business and stuff like that. It should just flow. It's like a river, right? It just flows. Patients are coming in, patients are getting results, staff is happy, referral sources are happy. Like when it's good, it's really, really good. And I think a lot of you guys watching this video right now have experienced seasons in your business where you're like, you know, hey, this is pretty awesome. But then a lot of times what happens is there's a constraint that comes up, and that constraint could be in the form of a patient, it could be in the form of a diagnosis that you might not be familiar working with, it could be in the form of an employee who maybe has core values or productivity issues, maybe vendors have changed and for whatever reason now you have a constraint where you're not getting the supplies you need. We also hear constraints all the time with like reimbursement cuts, or you know, hey, well the PTs could treat, but the PTAs, you know, if they're treating, they're going to get reimbursement cuts. So there's a lot of constraints that are thrown our way. And ultimately what we really need to do in order to mitigate that risk is first and foremost figure out like what the constraint is, but then the most empowering question is like, is there something that we can do before that constraint shows up to be able to put a system in place to be able to remove that constraint? And that's where a lot of times with owners, they're very reactive. And we see that a lot, where a lot of owners come in, we kind of call them fire marshal bills, where they come in, you know, they have a lot of information, like they're all upset, something's not working or something this, you know, they cause a lot of like disruption, and then they leave, and then when you try to go and ask follow-up questions, they're either very vague or they don't respond at all, and we're sitting there with a lot of confusion instead of clarity. But ultimately what we were trying to do is we want to make sure that we go from not being a reactive owner, but proactive. Okay, so patients are falling off the schedule at visit number 3. How come, right? It's causing a constraint in our business right now because they come in for an eval, they show up for visit 2, but then they don't make it to visit number 3. Well, how come? So in our practice, what we found is that most individuals that don't show up for visit number 3 or 4 has nothing to do with the service other than the fact that they saw multiple providers in the first 4 sessions. So they saw me, they saw Joey, they saw her, they saw that, right? They had to explain their situation a couple of times. So, you know, maybe there's a system that we could put in place to have better continuity of care. And that's why we've done things like pre-booking out appointments. So not that we get the patient to commit to their whole plan of care, but what we're really trying to do is we're trying to solve the constraints of continuity of care. So when someone comes in for an eval, we want to make sure that the eval visit and the second visit is seen with at least the evaluating provider. And then if we can, the eval, the second visit, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way to the end of plan of care, it's with the same therapist, right? And that's when patients are going to start to win the game a little bit more. Maybe you have a provider that comes in and you know you just onboarded them and you realize your onboarding process isn't that good, right? So the constraint is a lot of our providers coming in aren't producing the way we want them to because we didn't fully train them on what good looks like. So I want you guys, there's millions of examples that we can go through here, but I want you to really take a pulse check on your business right now and ask yourself this one question. What is the biggest constraint in our business right now, and how could we ruthlessly solve that problem? And I guarantee you that if you fix that constraint and you remove it and be a little bit more proactive in putting in something in place to replace it, you'll be surprised at the results that you get from it. So if you guys like this content, go ahead and click the follow and subscribe button on the page. If you want to learn a little bit more about what constraints you have inside of your business currently and want to speak to one of our members of our team, go ahead and click the link in the description, and we'll talk to you then. Take care, and I'll see you guys on the next video.